Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative take about the world around me. So my social media links will be provided, along with email, along with Substack, and buy me a coffee. And my audio platforms are Audible, Amazon Music, just to name a few. Spotify for podcasters, iHeart Radio, Pandora, Overcast, Pocket Cast, and of course, I'm looking to go to where you enjoy your podcast. I'm definitely on that. So this episode is about the artist that I think relays to believers as far as the social aspect of what they were facing and along with that, the political aspects and everything else with that. So I'm going to talk about Elvis Costello. I'm going to talk about Janis Joplin. I'm going to wrap up and talk about a little bit about Elvis as it relates, for the controversy, relates somewhat to that, and Jimi Hendrix. All right, so let's get into it. Also, to add on to the singers that I was previously mentioning that I'll talk about in this episode, the Ramones. I'm going to touch on them too. All right, so here we go. Let's dive in. So with Elvis Costello, the Ramones, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and I'll touch on Elvis as I get into more of the details about these artists. I think it's an ever-varying presence of the importance of what happens when people are speaking to their own explanations about things and the controversy and the problems that come within that. And delving deeper within that in the next part that I'm going to bring up about my own thoughts about all of this music, how I think from my point of view, how it set up a map, per se, to all of the different artists that are out and that came after them. And somewhat today, I think it's kind of stagnant today, but and nevertheless, all of that. Okay, so I'm gonna talk more in depth. All right, so going into depth about my thoughts about these singers. So Elvis Costello, he centered around speaking on controversy topics, where it be political, where it be feminism, the ideas of love, all of that. And he did it in a way that was really unique, to where it was subtle, but it was also upfront at the same time and humorous at the same time. So, for instance, Radio, explaining and talking about how the importance of tradition of radio and music, when, for instance, when radio was really popular, and this is my particular opinion about the song, when radio was really popular during the height of it, and particularly in the fireside chat era, the 40s, the 50s, and so on and so forth, people would tune into the radio to get news. People would tune in for music, and it was a sense of honest entertainment, genuine entertainment. And he's shedding light on how out of that, the commercialization of things, of how music was changing in his time period, and possibly perhaps in the future of what will go on with the music industry, particularly add on to this, payola, pay to play music, and that's unfortunately whether it's people are aware, the people who are aware of it versus the people who aren't aware, that particular artists pay to play for their songs to be pushed out in radio and all of this kind of things. And it's even been controversy with particular artists battling each other to silence each other's music just to get more notoriety with their own songs. And particularly with feminism, Elvis Costello talking about the whole thing with women valuing their beauty over traditional. The idea of not appreciating men being honorable towards women and showing them respect, and the power in being demure as a woman. And I'll go into more depth about his particular songs and all of this too, along with the other artists. And so on to the Ramones. These guys, they were American garage band breed. And you could hear that throughout their sound. And it's really goes to the testament of doing unconventional things, but also holding up to presenting things in an unconventional way by doing that, changing the ideas of that traditional mark of nationalism and pride in your country. And I think it was really interesting, particularly with the type of songs that they would go delve into. So they had that 60s vibe of how they would riff their songs with their guitar and everything else. But at the same time, they had that angst and that formality of punk rock, of going against what is considered to be socially convenient. And even the time frame of their songs were really short, which is the format for punk rock songs. Janis Joplin, and I'm going to tie all this up with Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix. So Janis Joplin, she would talk about things in a very candid way about the human experience and human condition of wanting money. If, for instance, oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz, of that idea of wanting the best, but the reality of the situation of which you're living, paycheck to paycheck, and poverty and all these that goes along the lines with that, and finding your way out and trying to have hope in a situation that's bleak. And Jimi Hendrix, with his style and how he famously lit his guitar in a means to show his stance against things, his stance against music, against things with what he defined how musicians should be, and everything else. And even how his presence when people saw him live, how he would just format things to where he's singing a song, and also along the lines with Janis Joplin too, how they would sing these songs, but from my point of view, it was weaved in a way and showcased in a way to where you're going on this story arc with them, and you get the start, the strong start, the middle, and the strong end of what their songs are about and what they are saying within these things. All right, so let's get into it. The details about all of these artists. All right, Jimi Hendrix. An American rock artist, singer, and composer who fused American traditions of blues, jazz, rock, and soul with techniques of British avant-garde rock to do this to redefine the electric guitar in his own image. Though his active career as a featured artist lasted a mere 4 years, Hendrix altered the course of popular music and became one of the most successful and influential musicians of his era. An instrumentalist who radically redefined the expressive potential and sonic palette of the electric guitar, he was the composer of a classic repertoire of songs ranging from ferocious rocker to delicate, complex ballads. He also was the most charismatic and concert performer of his generation. Moreover, he was a visionary who collapsed the genre boundaries of rock, soul, blues, and jazz, and an iconic feature whose appeal linked the concerns of hippies and revolutionaries by clothing black anger in the colorful costumes of London's Canterbury streets. So, a former paratrooper whose honorable medical discharge exempted him from service in the Vietnam War, Hendrix spent the early 1960s working as a freelance accompanist for a variety of musicians, both famous and obscure. His unorthodox style and his penchant for playing at high volume, however, limited him to a substantial level work until he was discovered in a small New York City club and brought to England in September of '66. Performing along two British musicians, bassist Noel Redding and drummer Mitch Mitchell, he stunned London's clubland with his instrumental ferocity and extroverted showmanship, numbering members of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and The Who among his admirers. It proved a lot easier for him to learn their tricks than it was for them to learn his. All right, and to wrap this up, Hendrix has an encyclopedic knowledge of the musical roots on which the cutting-edge rock of his time was based. But thanks to his years on the road with the likes of Little Richard and the Isley Brothers, he also had hands-on experience of cultural and social worlds in which those roots had developed, and a great admiration for the work of Bob Dylan, the Beatles, and the Yardbirds. Speedily adapting the current musical sartorial fashions of late 1966. London to his own needs, he was soon able not only to match the likes of The Who at their own high-volume guitar smashing game, but also to top them with what readily became the hottest ticket in town. All right, Elvis Costello, a British singer-songwriter who extended the musical and lyrical range of the punk and new wave movements. The son of musicians, Costello was exposed to a mix of British and American styles, dancehall, pop, to modern jazz, to the Beatles from an early age. During the early 1970s, he lived in London recording demos and performing locally while working as a computer programmer. He befriended Nick Lowe, bassist for the pub rock band. He was a bassist for the pub rock band, who brought him to the attention of Jack Riviera, one of the heads of the independent label Stiff Records. In 1977, Lowe produced Costello's first album, My Aim Is True. At critically and commercial success, it aligned with the cynicism and energy of punk bands like the Sex Pistols and The Clash, with the structures of a more literate songwriting tradition, weaving complex wordplay through a set of clever pop tunes and moving easily among very methodic styles. After the success of My Aim Is True, Costello formed a strong backing band, The Attractions, with Steve Knife on keyboard, Pete Thomas on drums, and Bruce Thomas on bass. One of the early albums with The Attractions, This Year's Model, Armed Forces, and Get Happy. Costello and Lowe developed a distinctive guitar and keyboard mix that was influenced by a variety of 1960s artists, including Booker T and the MGs. The most notable work of this early period, rockers such as This Year's Girl and Lip Service, deceptively upbeat pop tunes such as The Angels Wanna Wear My Red Shoes and Rapid Fire Soul, inflected songs such as Black and White World, featuring appealing methodic bass lines that complemented an energetic rhythm guitar and a almost awkward vocal style. Though densely constructed puns, Costello explored the intersection of power and intimacy, often from the perspective of a rejected lover. During the 1980s, Costello broadened his range, working with various producers who developed more layered arrangements. The hit Every Day I Write the Book in 1983 was composed during this period. And albums such as Trust and Imperial Bedroom won critical acclaim. However, the early 80s were also a time of creative inconsistency, as Costello experimented with the country genre in Almost Blue and released Goodbye Cruel World. Both albums had only limited critical and commercial success. By 1985, Costello divorced his wife and he married Kat O'Regan, the bassist of the British band, the following year. Following his marriage, Costello recorded King of America, a radical stylistic departure produced by T-Bone Burnett. King of America featured spare acoustic arrangements and a more direct lyrical style. Costello continued to explore new sounds to his next album, Spike. In both of these works, Costello wrote about the role of the artist of popular culture, blending contemporary cultural imagery with modern and classical literature. He developed a dissonant lyric style, the influence of modern poets such as T.S. Eliot was evidenced on visionary songs such as This Town from Spike and Couldn't Call It Unexpected from The Mighty Life of a Rose. In the 1990s, he released a mixed set of recordings ranging from straightforward, well-crafted rock to experimental works such as the song titled The Juliet Letters, recording with a string quartet, and Painted from Memory, which was another of his works. Written with the composer Burt Bacharach, a single from the latter, I Still Have That Other Girl, won a Grammy Award. Costello continued to develop musical and lyrically and remained one of rock's most respected songwriters well into the 21st century. He and O'Riordan divorced in 2002, and the following year he married jazz musician Diane Krall. Later entries in his include the albums Where I Was Cruel of 2002, 2004, A Ballad, and 2008, National Ransom, 2010, 2013, 2018, Look Now, 2020, Hey, Clockface, just to name a few. In 2021, he released Spanish Model, a Spanish language version of this year's Model. It featured numerous other artists. Hold on, sweetheart, just a minute. It featured numerous other artists, including Juan Ash. Costello also co-wrote with Brunette the Academy Award-nominated song, The Scarlet Tide, for the 2003 film Cold Mountain. All right, Janis Joplin. An American singer, the premier female blues vocalist of the 1960s, who dazzled listeners with her fierce and uninhibited musical style. After an unhappy childhood in a middle-class family in southeastern Texas, Joplin attended Lamar State College of Technology and the University of Texas at Austin before dropping out in 1963 to sing folk songs and especially the blues and Texas clubs. After a long sojourn in San Francisco, during which she abused alcohol and amphetamines, she went back to Texas, only to return to San Francisco in 1966 to become the vocalist for Big Brother and the Holding Company at the recommendation of hippie impresario Chet Helms. Buoyed by Joplin's bluesy vocals, the hard-rocking band released an album on independent mainstream records, then stunned audience at the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967 with a legendary performance highlighted by Joplin's rendition of Ball and Chain, a rhythm and blues classic by Big Mama Thornton. Big Brother's first album for major label Columbia, Cheap Thrills of 1968, went to number 1. The single Piece of My Heart reached number 12, and One Time Ugly Duckling. Joplin continued her transformation into a strong-willed, sexually aggressive rock icon. Leaving Big Brother, she formed the Cosmic Blues Band, reaching number 5 in 1969 with I Got Them Old Cosmic Blues Again, Mama. Joplin and the band performed at Woodstock, but broke up shortly thereafter, and she became a regular heroin user, unfortunately. In 1970, engaged to be married, her life seemingly on track, Joplin was recording an album with her new group, the Full Tick Boogie Band, when she died of an accidental overdose of heroin. Released after that album, Pearl topped the chart in 1971, as did the single Me and Bobby McGee. Joplin's importance in the history of rock is due to not only her strength as a singer, but also her intensity as a performer, which flew in the face of the conventions that dictated how a girl singer should act. Her raw blues-soaked voice, influenced by Thornton, Led Belly, and Bessie Smith, was matched by her uninhibited physical movements. The two elements fused in mesmerizing displays of soulfulness. Few had thought a singer of her. Few had thought that she could pull off as her statue. Joplin's story is presented in a thinly veiled biography film, The Rose, of 1979. Her life and career were documented through archival footage, interviews with her associates and experts, from her personal correspondence, and the documentary film Janis Little Girl Blue. She was also inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1995 and received a Grammy Award for a Lifetime Achievement in 2005. And to add on with the statue, I think it's very interesting that because she happens to be white, people just wrote her off and said, unfortunately, as another thing where we're gonna categorize you in this box, and you can't present yourself and understand the traditionally black musical genres of blues and jazz and things of that nature. And she proved the notion that if you delve down really, really deep into music and you see it for what it is, it's colorless. And what I'm saying by this is that music, and this is, my personal point of view about this, music in itself is speaking on, for the most part, about the experience that humans face. And from these experiences, pretty much anybody can relate to that. And I think it's very interesting that she proved, and she continues to prove with her music, even though she is no longer living, that music is all about the experience and the understanding of the human condition, and we all can relate to that. All right, Elvis Presley. An American popular singer widely known as the King of Rock and Roll and one of rock's dominant performers of the mid-1950s until his death. He grew up dirt poor in Tupelo, Mississippi, and his family soon moved to Memphis as a teenager. Now, when producer Sam Phillips at the Sun Records, a local blues label, responded to his audition tape with a phone call, several weeks worth of recording sections ensured, with a band consisting of Presley guitarist Scotty Moore and bassist Bill Black. Their repertoire consisted of the kind of material for which Presley would become famous, with the blues and country songs, Tin Pan Alley ballads, and gospel hymns. Presley knew some of his music from the radios, some of it from his parents' Pentecostal church, and the group sings. He attended at Rev. H.W. Brewster's Black Memphis Church and some of it from the Beale Street blues clubs he began frequenting as a teenager. Presley was already a flamboyant personality with a relatively long, greased black hair and wild-colored clothing combinations, but his full musical personality did not emerge until he had the band begin playing with the blues singer, author Big Boy Crump's songs That's All Right Mama in July of 1954. They arrived at the startling synthesis eventually dubbed rockabilly, retaining many of its original blues inflections, but with Presley's high tenor voice adding a lighter touch and with the basic rhythm striking a much more simple groove. The sound was the hallmark of the 5 singles Presley released on Sun over the next year. Although none of them became a national hit by August of 1955, when he released the 5th Mystery Train, arguably his greatest record ever, he had attracted a substantial Southern following for his records. His live performances and his regional roadhouse and clubs, and his radio performances on the nationally aired Louisiana High Ride. A key musical change came when drummer D.J. Fontana was added, first for the High Ride show, but also on records beginning with Mystery Train. Presley's management was then turned over to Colonel Tom Parker, a country music hustler who had made stars of Eddie Arnold and Hank Snow. Parker arranged for Presley's song catalog and recorded a contract to be sold to major New York City-based enterprises Hill Range and RCA Victor, respectively. Sun received a total of $35,000. Elvis got $5,000. He began recording at RCA's studio in Nashville, Tennessee, with a somewhat larger group of musicians, but still including more Black Fontana, and began to create a national sensation with a series of hits: Heartbreak Hotel, Don't Be Cruel, and Love Me Tender, All Shook Up, and more. From 56 to 58, he completely dominated the pop music charts and ushered in the age of rock and roll, opening doors for both white and black rock artists. His television appearances, especially those on Ed Sullivan's Sunday night variety show, set records for the size of the audience. Even his films, A Few Slight Vehicles, were box office smashes. Presley became the teen idol of his decade, greeted everywhere by screaming hordes of young women, and when it was announced in 58 that he would be drafted and would enter the U.S. Army, there was that rarest of all pop culture events, a moment of true grief. More important, he served as the great cultural catalyst of his period. Elvis projected a mixed vision of humanity and self-confidence, of intense commitment and comic disbelief in his ability to inspire frenzy. He inspired literally thousands of musicians, and initially those more or less minded Southerners, from Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, on down to where the first generation of rockabillys and later people who have far different combinations of musical and cultural influence and ambitions, from John Lennon to Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan to Prince. It was also impossible to think of a rock star of any importance who did not owe a debt to Presley. Beyond that event, Presley inspired his audience. As a result, he was anything but universally adored. Those who did not worship him found him despicable. All right, so Preachers and pundits declared him an anathema. His Pentecostally driven hip-swinging stage style and breathly vocal aside seemed obscene. And this goes along the lines with me talking in more depth about the controversy with him, how his movements and how he was presenting himself on stage, it seemed taboo and unacceptable, and people thought that he was corrupting the youth to be more sexualized, more uninhibited. And it's kind of like that thing where chicken and egg kind of thing, or what came first, the chicken or the egg. And it's, you gotta, I think personally, you gotta account for what is it, are young people more conscious and they're more they're more influenced, or is it a part of parental provision where, knowing what your child is listening to, and if you don't agree with it, talking to them about it and understanding it and trying to figure out what's happening in their lives. Is a whole thing with that. And also the whole thing where Elvis Presley stealing black music and exploiting black particularly black different black artists, and not giving contributions to them, when not understanding that Elvis had a great deep love and appreciation for particular black artists, and specifically with blues artists and all of these things, and that seeped into his style of music and how he wanted to present himself. Personally, what I see from my point of view about this, how he wanted to be a musical artist. And that's something to say about that you still, even though you're different from someone, again, music, tying into the depths of talking about, at the core of music, the unique and different experience humans face, and we can all relate to that. All right, so I'm fixing to wrap this up here. So, racists denounced him for mingling black music with white, and Presley was always scrupulous in crediting his black sources. One of these things that made him different from the Tin Pan Alley writers and singers who had for decades lifted black musician styles without credit. He was also pronounced responsible for all teenage hooliganism and juvenile delinquency. Yet in every appearance on television, he appeared polite and soft-spoken, almost shy. All right, the Ramones. An American band that influenced the rise of punk rock on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. The original members were Joey Ramone, Johnny Ramone, Dee Dee Ramone, and Tommy Ramone. Founded in New York City in 1974, the Ramones cultivated a simple three-chord sound that became the foundation of punk rock. Played at a blistering tempo, frequently lasting little more than 2 minutes, and with catchy, often willfully insane lyrics by critics so stupid that they were smart. Ramones songs such as Blistering Bop, Sheena is a Punk Rocker, and I Want to Be Sedated contrasted sharply with the complex, carefully orchestrated mainstream rock of the era. In ripped jeans and black leather jackets, the Ramones made their reputation with almost non-stop touring and energetic live performances, notably at the New York City CBGB Club. Their tour of England in 1976 proved a major inspiration for the punk movement in Britain, where they enjoyed great commercial success than at home. Influenced by the rebelliousness of their contemporaries of New York Dolls, and by 1960, pop music, especially bubblegum and surf, the Ramones brought their back-to-basics approach to such albums of their eponymous debut in 76 and Rocket to Russia in 77. With a shifting lineup, they continued to record and perform into the 90s, disbanding in 1996. In 2002, the Ramones were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And in 2011, they received a Grammy Award for a Lifetime Achievement. Alright, so to wrap everything up and to close out, so my overall final thoughts, it just is very interesting how these particular artists were laid back to, I think from my perspective, to the Weavers, how with political agendas being exposed onto them, as for instance for the Weavers' experience with what they went through with the Red Scare and singing songs and speaking upon their experience of being human by using folk music to catapult this experience of what humans face on a day-to-day basis, and having the notion of communist ties without real proof and being persecuted without any real evidence. It really is something to say with what happens when people go within hysteria, emotions within hysteria, the emotions of not seeing things rationally, and prejudice coming without in that. And also along the lines with the political nuances of Elvis Costello, particularly with the song Oliver's Army, when he was mentioning about the Irish War and the devastation that was going on at that time with the revolution, with what was going on in the state of Ireland, and using the term white N-word being controversy with when it was going around, particularly in America and so on and so forth, and other countries and all these things, without understanding the reasons behind using that derogatory term. Is that slur was used towards Irish people, particularly Irish men at the time, when all of this political unrest was going on, which caused these wars. And going on to Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, how they changed what the notion of what it means to be a black artist, or what it means to be a white artist, a female artist. And everybody took appreciation into that when people started noticing, and to say some people who It's people just who don't like particular music or still don't want to hear it for whatever reason, but it's still noticeable the changes that they made within the music industry, particularly with these genres, melding all of these different ideas of music together and making it their own, jazz, blues, and bringing that soulful rock into their messaging with what they want to say to people. And then with Elvis, with his controversy, and particularly with everything with his marrying his wife at a very young age, and all along the lines of all of that, and the controversy of it being taboo, and everything else with these notions of looking within to that, and also on the terms of within his music about how he was also doing the same thing of saying, I have an appreciation of this type of sound and music, the blues. I have a deep-rooted connection with this, and so I'm going to take these things and make it my own and craft it into what I want to sing about and how I want to present myself as a singer. It is really something to be said about all of these things, and it's really something to look into when we speak or address, I think, think about music. Revolving back again to the ever-present, noticeable thing about music. It just has that unique ability to address things that can speak to people in ways that at times simple communication, the news, science sometimes, looking back to history, all of these things cannot break down sometimes. Music has a way of uniting these things and people taking notice and listening with the notice of an appreciation of what these particular artists that they like have to say, where it be admiration, controversy, and so on and so forth. People are speaking on it. It's being heard. All right, so this reaches the end of the Harboring Light. So again, on Friday, I'm going to break down the particular songs that the Weavers wrote, and I'm going to expand on these songs and give my thoughts and all of that. All right, tune in, turn up, and definitely take care. Bye-bye now.